Hello everyone. So this is lecture number 2, session number 2 of July monthly study intensive on Avatamsaka Sutra. So in the first lecture, I went through first portion of introduction, which is basically warm-up to make the people who are participating in this lecture series feeling a little more familiar or warm toward, unless otherwise, rather intimidating voluminous sutra. Now, next segment for introduction, I like to talk about a little more inclined toward factual information. So it is about how Avatamsaka Sutra was composed or edited or established, and then about the names, etc., etc. So it's a bit like a compulsory portion or figure ice skate vis-a-vis freestyle expression. So most of the time, in the lecture series, any lecture series, this portion is a little boring, maybe tedious, but at the same time, it is really necessary to go through this. And so in other words, this is more like academic study portion. But I like to tell you a little bit to start with about this portion by introducing this very well-known episode. You might have probably heard about this and read about this, and you might have heard me talking about this several times elsewhere. But this episode really symbolizes to me about our attitude when we study those academic or informational portion of this text. In millennium year 2000, it was the 800th anniversary Dogen's birth. Dogen was, as you know, born in year 1200. So in the United States, there was a commemorative event, and it was held in San Francisco, and Stanford University, I think, offered the site for this Dogen conference commemorating Dogen's 800th year of birth. And then our teacher, principal teacher, Okumura Roshi, moved from his office from Los Angeles to San Francisco so that it's easy for him to participate and also communicate and commute to the site. And of course, he was a part of this Dogen conference. During this conference, there was a panel discussion, and then some of those conversations brought up in this panel discussion, of course, went to the conversation topic about Shunryu Suzuki Shunryu Roshi, who came to the San Francisco, assigned for heading the then Japanese temple Sokoji on the top of the hill of Japantown in San Francisco. I think it was 1959. And then, of course, he became the first person who brings Buddhist practice as a practice and spread it through the people who are interested in Buddhism. Of course, Buddhism as it is came to the United States much earlier, about 100 years ago. But it was came as a part of world philosophy, as a knowledge. And then also the temples were opened for, for instance, Japanese Americans who really needed someone to conduct memorial services and funeral services, etc., etc. So as a practice of Buddhism, particularly Zazen practice, Suzuki Roshi almost became like Bodhidharma to China. And then he brought the practice portion, the meat of the Buddhist teaching, to the United States. So therefore, of course, and then Dogen's conference is also held in San Francisco. So in the audience, there was someone who was the first generation of the students who actually studied with and practiced with Suzuki Roshi, and shared this wonderful memory about Takkesage, robe chant. We recite at the end of our morning zazen every day. By now, people here chant most of the time in English, but at that time it was such early years of zazen practice was introduced to the United States. Suzuki Roshi didn't have an English translation of robe chant. So every morning, the chant was in Sino-Japanese, Daizage Dappuku, Musoufuku Tenye, Hibunyorai Kyo, Kodo Shoshujo. So this student was very interested in what exactly we are reciting. So he approached Suzuki Roshi and asked, so what is this about? What are we actually saying in the chant? And at that time, Katakiri Roshi was already assigned to support Suzuki Roshi, and they were together in Sokoji. And then, so therefore, Katakiri Roshi immediately tried to look for English translation, which was kept in some sort of shelves in the office. And then looking at that, Suzuki Roshi stops Katakiri Roshi and looks at the student who raised the question, saying, this is about love. And then the student really had a really strong moment of, I don't know how to describe it, but I'm sure all of you have this type of moment of some particular sentence and particular portion of the teaching really hits you directly to your heart, and it makes you feel like, yes, that moment. So it was a wonderful moment for this student. Of course, by the time of this conference was held, this student was a really well-seasoned practitioner who actually has his own Zendo. So everyone was like, wow, that's really wonderful experience. And then in the panel discussion, there was this famous Buddhist academic person. I think he was someone who was teaching at Stanford University. And then he says, he takes that story and he kind of, in a cold manner, not really like heart-to-heart related manner, he started to say, but in Japanese language, of course, he's someone who's expert in Japanese linguistic study. And he says, in Japanese language, there's no differentiation between L and R. And it is really true. I always have a problem pronouncing L and R. And also, there's no differentiation between V and B. That is also true. In Japanese language, there's no pronunciation to utilize touching lower lip with upper teeth, something like that. And also how we pronounce words with the tongue touched on the upper inside of the mouth is very different from other Western languages. So therefore, he's pointing out maybe it was just a simple misunderstanding, knowing very well Suzuki Roshi didn't speak English very well. Maybe he just said, this is about robe. And then you misheard it and misunderstood it, and then you felt so touched about this. And then, it's a bit like type of a comment, you kind of facing the people who are really touched so emotionally, and then you turn this around into some kind of a very chilly factual conversation. It's very strange, interesting. But Okumura Roshi was also sitting within this panel, and then he listens to this conversation. He finds it really genuinely funny. Actually, it is kind of funny, don't you think? And also, it is really funny to pointing out the fact that we Japanese folks who studied and learned how to speak English, we are never really a good speaker. Japanese people are really not strong in foreign language study, and our education system really doesn't help us to study foreign languages. It is really true. It's a common knowledge. So it's kind of funny, it's like a self-satire type of laugh. And then he stops laughing and then he says, but, it may be so, but it actually doesn't matter at all because the core portion of the teaching actually delivered so well. And I found that comment was so wonderful. And then, very often Okumura Roshi is introduced by people who don't really know him very well, saying he's a great Buddhist academic. For us, being called as a Buddhist academic is a bit strange because we find it a little derogatory almost. So Okumura Roshi always says, no, I'm not the academic, I'm a Buddhist practitioner. So with that spirit, I always study and talk about this academic portion that we have to go through. So please try to follow my conversation. I try to make it as enjoyable as possible, even though this is very much about the statistics and the surveys and the information, etc., etc. And then I try to actually point out and illuminate why this is so important for our own practice. It is not about our knowledge, but it is about our own life practice and why it is so important. I do see some kind of negative effects of what we do with the Buddhist text. We do have to explain all these words and phrases so that all of us reading and studying this Buddhist text be on the same page so that we can go further to really understand the core meaning of this and how to incorporate into our own life. But on the process of that, we have to go through all of those information of academic portion. And some people have mistakenly taken this in as if it is a knowledge and building your knowledge capacity and start to feel a little proud about how much they know. But that's really not the point at all. It's actually, if that happens, if you start to feel kind of almost like proud and arrogant about how much you know about those surveys and statistics and all that, I think it's just completely opposite direction they took. So upon saying that, I really have to start to talk about those academic portion. So I'm basically telling myself, be careful, Issan, and I'm telling you, be careful when you study those academic portion. So, to start with, Kengonkyo. I mentioned the name itself is also a subject of the current debates as well. But to start with, what exactly Kengonkyo is talking about? And of course, Kengonkyo is authentically revered and also traditionally trusted Buddhist text. So therefore, they are always talking about the two things. One thing is Buddha Dharma, and another thing, this is not like a two separate thing, but therefore, it also talks about the Buddha way. In our tradition, we never really assume everyone in the audience, everyone in the group, classroom, is really understanding those words in the same way. And then in our tradition, meaning Dogen tradition, we always make sure to explain things from the scratch so that we create a very strong fundamental idea or foundation to build on top of that. So to start with, what is Buddhism is always the beginning point. First of all, when I use the word Buddhism, it is already English. And then when you say Buddhism, it always gives the people impression about this is some kind of ism. But when we are talking about Buddhism, Buddha's teaching, we are actually using completely different concept, I think. It's probably not completely different, but there's a little bit of a gap in between what we are thinking and the translation in English. Aoyama Roshi and other very well-trusted Dogen teachers, when I approached them, they always cautioned me be very, very careful in translation because they think any translation is a mistranslation. I think it's really true. If you just translate the Buddhist text, there's always something missing, there's something strange is added. It is a very difficult task to bring something just so nurtured in one culture and bringing into another culture which is so different from the other culture. So I try to be very cautious about this so that everyone does understand what we are talking about one thing. So for instance, there's always a conversation about is Buddhism a religion or a philosophy? And then a short answer is neither. The reason is when you use the word English or Western language word religion, we are basically talking about some kind of a belief system that places creator or creators or some kind of a power outside of this being. And then so therefore it is usually built as me being human, suffering, ignorant, and then seeking some kind of power, seeking some kind of help from this powerful being. Sometimes it's a noumenon, sometimes some figure that is called God or gods or deities, and then these some being outside of us, separated myself, is actually rescuing me or helping me and saving me. So that's the structure of the usual religious belief system or spiritual belief system. And so therefore, Buddhism is not that. So therefore, in another word, it is not religion, so to speak. And it is not philosophy, because philosophy is something that comes out of a human mind and human thought. And Buddhism's one of the first tasks is to examine where the thought comes from. And we don't actually trust thought being someone's thoughts. So therefore, it is neither thought system like philosophy, neither religion. So what is this? And how we always have approached it. So our lineage basically comes from Sawaki Roshi at this point. You know, within this group of the people, most of us are under the same family. Sawaki Uchiyama and Sawaki Roshi, Uchiyama Roshi's disciples, they all nourished and raised all of us, in another word. So we are in the same family. So I often mention how each one of the three, meaning Sawaki Roshi, Uchiyama Roshi, and Okumura Roshi. And recently, I'm also adding a lot of teaching from Aoyama Roshi, who also studied under Sawaki Roshi, Uchiyama Roshi very strongly. So Sawaki Roshi's typical way of explaining this is take a look at the Japanese word called shūkyō. Shūkyō is the word often translated as a religion, but as it is not religion. Shūkyō's shu means principle, kyo means teaching. So in another word, we are talking about the type of the sets of principal teaching, principally trustworthy. So in another word, when we are in problems, or when we have some problems, we are in suffering, we are in pain, psychological, mental, spiritual, physical, we can always rely on this set of teaching as a principle of how we live our lives. That is shukyo. So it is a little different from as a connotation from a Western language religion. And then the principal teaching taught by Gautama Buddha is called Bukkyo. Bukkyo is Buddha's teaching, and then this Buddha's teaching, Bukkyo, is translated as a Buddhism. So therefore, when you hear the English word as a Buddhism, and then when I hear Bukkyo, the connotation, there's some kind of gap. So I really like you to understand what I'm talking about, what we are talking about, what the Buddhist Sutra is talking about, comes from Buddha's teaching, Bukkyo, and it's the type of the teaching you can principally rely on. So forget about those segmented words like a religion or philosophy. Maybe we can use that to use these new words. So when you are basically bringing this completely new culture, Buddhist culture, can I use the English word Buddhist, but the Buddha's teaching culture to completely different culture, maybe we can start from the scratch instead of trying to relate to some kind of referential points. So that's the most important portion. So now, what exactly Buddha taught? After looking at all of those Buddhist authentic texts such as Pali Canon and such as Avatamsaka Sutra, Prajnaparamita Sutra, Lotus Sutra, you probably are quite clear they're only talking about one thing. This one thing is what this is about. And so therefore, when you really start to see what this is about, you know how this human body should be behaving and acting and speaking and living in this reality of the world. So this is a very interesting portion. The difference actually came from most fundamental questioning. For instance, when people are interested in some sort of spiritual teaching, most possibly, including Gautama Buddha, Siddhartha himself, was in trouble and some kind of question about life. And then question is usually coming from the sense of sufferings and pains while you are living in this life. And then you start to feel, what exactly is this? What is this? How am I able to alleviate this pain and sense of sufferings? So most of the time what we do is without really examining this sense of I am suffering, this I, we usually go out saying, well, I'm in pain. Can you help me? So there's a separation between I am suffering and also some power or some being who will help. And we just seek for that power outside of us. But what Gautama Buddha did was quite unique. Gautama Buddha, yes, I am suffering, I'm in pain, and I need to alleviate this, I need to find the solution. But wait a minute. So I keep saying, I am in pain, I am suffering, I see this, I. But what is this I? So instead of going to seek something outward, he seeks something internally, inward. And then his methodology was, of course, starting from silent meditation. And then I'm going to make this into like such gross generalization to make it simple. But if you are somebody who's been practicing for quite some time, you probably can easily see the point and easily agree with the point that when you start to receive Buddhist meditation instruction, particularly shikantaza, and you just sit, and what you are doing is basically you are just sitting here now with everything around you, surrounding you, and then you are probably instructed to, just to sit is very difficult, particularly for like modern people like us who are always trying to busy ourselves and filling every minute of every waking hours. But then suddenly you are instructed to sit just still. And then what happens is, most possibly, it's easier to focus on something. So very often you are asked to focus on the sensation of the breath, and then sometimes you are asked to focus on something particular, like sensation on your eyes and sensation on your ears, etc., etc. But whatever the way, eventually you start to sit just there, doing nothing. And then what you really start to recognize is, wow, everything is just constantly coming and going, and constantly arising and disappearing. And that includes your own body, and includes your own thoughts, includes your emotion or feelings, etc., etc. The last time we met, I was talking about the depression, and even the depression is not just the one static thing that stays within me, and it constantly changes, goes out and coming in, becomes thick, sometimes thin, and then dissipate, and then come back again, etc., etc. Thoughts, we can't even control what thought comes next, even if we try. So eventually, then you really start to recognize, so this constant change is not just within myself, because it's all related with my environment, including what I ate yesterday, what I ate for lunch, what I drank, and how many hours I slept. Am I tired and not tired? Is the air fresh, etc., etc. And then you really start to recognize everything, completely everything, is really related and interrelated, and creating, disappearing, creating, disappearing. So that's how we actually discover how things seems to be made very differently from what we were taught that it is made. And then Gautama Buddha himself tried to describe this in his own way. And I think today, because we are really talking about Avatamsaka Sutra, Avatamsaka Sutra actually has one chapter about Four Noble Truths. So Four Noble Truths was also one of the way Gautama Buddha described what it is or how this is made. For instance, Four Noble Truths starts with the dukkha, ku, shu, metsu, do. Yes? So the first portion is dukkha, and the next portion is how dukkha is made. So in other words, dukkha is the sense of suffering, and then how this sense of suffering, the origin, this sense of suffering is made. It's an explanation of how this is made. And then also, there is a way to alleviate this sense of dukkha. And then also, there's a suggestion of all of the elements of our daily life. There's a way to keep on examining this and keep on alleviating this. So that's the Four Noble Truths. But one thing that's really most important is probably the first portion, dukkha, which is often explained and translated, as I noticed in English, at least in the United States, as pain and suffering. But so therefore, in some Buddhist organization, I have noticed that presenters are explaining this dukkha as, in our lifetime, some experiences are experienced as a pain or suffering. Sometimes some are not. But that's okay. But clearly understanding it, you should know this word dukkha actually comes from the type of existential gap. As soon as you set up this sense of self, there's a gap between self and something we experience as outside of this I. So in another word, it is a gap between I and others. So therefore, we are talking about how dukkha is made is also by setting up this static sense of I is the cause of dukkha as well. So recently in Japan, in all of the Buddhist schools and Buddhist temples, we often translate dukkha. Our Sino-Japanese translation, as you know, for centuries, over nearly 2,000 years, it is translated as ku. So ku is also, in a contemporary Japanese, it feels like we are talking about pain and suffering. So we try not to do that, and we try to explain this as things don't go along in the way I want, is our way of explaining dukkha means. So if you really start to see the original meaning of dukkha in that way, you really start to see Four Noble Truth is actually a depiction of what it is and how we are. So in this true reality, as soon as I separate myself from others, despite the fact that we are all constantly interrelated, so therefore it is technically impossible to separate this from anything outside of this. Like for instance, I constantly breathe in, breathe out. So I cannot separate my Issan out from air around me, oxygen around me. And the same thing with everything. And I cannot separate my thoughts unless I'm very, very cautious from my educational background, cultural background, all of the experiences I went through consciously, subconsciously in the last 70 years, etc., etc. It's all the elements to create this I. So in other words, this I is always not separate and always interrelated with all of those things. So therefore, as soon as I start to say, no, this is my opinion, then of course there's a gap between my opinion vis-a-vis what's around. And this is my wish to have this way, is of course there's a gap between how things keep on going. So that's dukkha, and that's actually a great depiction of how our life is made, or how this world is made. So of course, Gautama Buddha made so many wonderful depiction, explanation of how this is, and what it is, and how we should be. So we use the word Buddha Dharma, Buppo, to describe what it is. Buppo's po is Dharma, in Sino-Japanese translated as this word ho, which means law. In this case, there's some kind of a way things move inevitably, even though human may not really wanting to do so. For instance, as long as on the planet Earth, water flows from high point to low point, no matter how you want to have this flow from low to up, it always flows from up to north. That's like a law, isn't it? So therefore, I think it's a very clever way to translate Dharma into whole. But in this case, Buppo means Buddha's law, Buddha Dharma, meaning it's a depiction of what it is. So I usually translate Buppo is what it is. And then when you really start to clarify this what it is, you almost inevitably, naturally start to recognize how I should be in it, in accordance, in alignment with my understanding as it becomes clearer and deeper. My behavioral pattern, speech pattern, how we function in this world is starting to shift. So this is the way to be in this way, and this is Buddha's way. So therefore, it's Buddha way, Butsudo. So Butsudo portion I always translate as how to be. So all of these Buddhist texts is a depiction or explanation or teaching, shall we say, of what it is and how we should be in it. Buppo and Butsudo, Buddha Dharma and Buddha's way. So of course, as the time goes on, this explanation or expression keeps on changing. Because as Gautama Buddha himself taught to his original students, as soon as they really start to clarify the matter, they all should go back to their own nations and own country where they come from and utilize their own word. It is quite interesting to me that by 21st century, 150 years of a Buddhist academia really studied and researched and then somehow able to prove among the group of the people who flocked around Gautama Buddha, most possibly more than dozens of different languages were spoken. So Buddhism was already at that point quite international. So therefore, each one of them goes back and utilizing their own language and utilizing their own referential things, and then tried to explain Buddha Dharma and the Buddha way. So therefore, of course, some expression doesn't deliver beyond space and time. Let's say, for instance, right now at this point of 2024 in New York City, if I try to explain Buddha Dharma, Buddha way, utilizing some kind of examples from, let's say, popular television series on Netflix, it may probably not mean anything 20 years later because those culturally everyone understood at this point may not be something surviving 20 years later. So many sutras and many expressions in the last 2,500 years came and gone and came and gone. But some of them kept this validity, so to speak. For instance, as the time goes on into so-called Mahayana era, there were three very important sets of sutra, or sutras, shall we say, start to arise. And then first one is Prajnaparamita Sutras. Prajnaparamita Sutras is not, as I keep saying, sutras. It's a plural. It's not the one single sutra, but then it started to try to focus on Gautama Buddha's teaching, this very important portion of Shanyata teaching, which means currently we try to explain this English by English words called interrelated origination. But Shanyata is often translated as emptiness. I don't think it's a bad translation at all. And then this translation, Shanyata being emptiness, actually comes from Sino-Japanese translation of Shanyata into ku. Ku, as a colloquial language, it's air or space. But when we say air or space, by now we know it is not a void. It is packed with so much energy, elements, etc. It's just simply we cannot really see it from human eyes. But from different type of eyes, you can see this is packed with elements and also constantly merging, constantly separating, constantly interrelated, and keep creating things. Sometimes this keep creating things come to the point through human eyes we can actually find it as a visible things. Well, so take a look at the sky. Sky, from our point of view, our human eyes, looks empty. But because of this, all condition keeps changing, or relation keeps changing, relation between moisture, etc., water, air, all of those elements inside, and then start to create something visible, which normally we call as cloud, right? And then cloud starts to grow and starts to become kind of really ominous and start to even create some kind of electric figure like thunder and storm and then all of that. Then start to calm down and then dissipate and then elements all breaks down into again, something invisible, what we call air. So just like that. And then that portion, of course, right now and 21st century modern people, we have all of those support from scientific knowledge. But I think it's really amazing that nearly 2,000 years ago, people are really started to explain things, how this is made from that aspect. And then utilize this word shanyata, and then this sets of teachings who really try to explain what it is from the point of this concept, shanyata, was started to be called Prajnaparamita Sutras. Prajnaparamita Sutras kept on basically written over the course of nearly 1,000 years. So this is also very interesting process, because at the beginning they were trying to express Buppo from focusing on this shanyata in verse. And then someone started to see, wow, this is amazing, but can you explain this a little better? So they started to give prose into it. And then someone said, wow, this is really amazing and wonderful, but can you explain more? So there's hundreds of years of a process of starting to be born as a verse into verse and prose combination, and getting longer and longer and longer. And then, to the point, it was too long for the people to read and memorize. So someone said, maybe it's too long. Can you make it into just the gist of it, meat of it? And so there will be another form of coming to shorter and shorter and shorter. And then when it comes to the extremely short, these thousands of versions of Prajnaparamita Sutras includes this very famous sutra. Actually, this sutra is also available in Japanese temples. And then in Japanese temples, the sutras are this size, right? And then you open it like you open a fan. And then when you open it, there's only one word, or one letter. And this one letter is Sanskrit a, meaning this is like English and or non or in. So in another word, it says no. So in short, whatever I thought about, no. So if you really have to make it into one letter to describe what it is, you can just describe it as a. And then of course people thought, no way, this went too extreme. So next 100 years it gets longer again. But on this whole process of nearly 1,000 years of developing this Shanyata teaching under the name of Prajnaparamita Sutras, most famous one would be, first of all, I think probably most famous one would be Heart Sutra. Heart Sutra comes from this middle portion when people started to make it very long and then started to make it short. And then Heart Sutra, as originally, is short enough to recite it in within 3 minutes. And it really gives you the core of the teaching. So, as you know, in our practice, I think every day we recite Heart Sutra at least once or twice, depending on your style of your practice. And another one, probably very well known because we come from a Zen tradition, is a Diamond Sutra. And then another one I actually like to read is 8,000 verses of Prajnaparamita Sutras. This is the point when it was starting to explain and coming longer and longer and longer. As you probably know, Nagarjuna, who became a decisive element of evolution of a Buddhist teaching, wrote a great commentary on Prajnaparamita Sutras, and then he was mainly utilizing 25,000 verses of Prajnaparamita Sutras. So it's done a little after 8,000 verses on the process of sutra becoming longer and longer. I normally feel as long as you are quite familiar and studied 8,000 lines of verses of Prajnaparamita Sutra, you probably understand what the Nagarjuna is talking about in his commentary. So you don't probably need to read 25,000 because it's a little too long for us to spend that much of time to examine all of the lines. So with our group, New York Zen Community for Dogen Study, we actually spent, I think it was a little over a year. In early years of the formation of the group, we got together every Monday evening and we studied 8,000 lines of Prajnaparamita Sutra. It's quite readable and it's a wonderful translation by Edoardo Conzi. So I, of course, utilized the Sino-Japanese original translation together with Edoardo Conzi's translation, and then to make it even more understandable for the group. But I highly recommend you should actually, if you never have read it, you should probably get the copy and then study the book. And of course, for Heart Sutra, Okumura Roshi has the best commentary and detailed commentary so that you can really understand what Heart Sutra is about. And this is the one of the chapters in his book, Living by Vow. And this is also, I highly recommend everybody to read so that everybody is on the same page of understanding. But anyway, this in this Prajnaparamita Sutras, their typical, most iconic expression of what Buddha Dharma is about is the famous line that comes from Heart Sutra: form is emptiness, emptiness is form. And as you already know, it is not the form is emptiness. Form is emptiness and emptiness is form. So therefore, it's not talking about there's a form and there's emptiness. It's talking about the form is emptiness and emptiness is form. That's how this trajectory, shall we say, of this world is made. So this is iconic and also rather mysterious if we don't really study under correct teacher. But then still it really hits our chord of our heart so strongly and makes us this moment of wow, kind of clarity, moment of clarity. So this is really interesting. Talking about this description of Butsudo and Buppo and Butsudo, what it is and how to be. In Mahayana Buddhism, next process of Mahayana Buddhism is developing into 81st century to 2nd century. While the Prajnaparamita Sutra is becoming more and more detailed, there was yet another group of the people who created what now we call Lotus Sutra. And Lotus Sutra is also one of the top most important Mahayana texts which also gave such strong impact to our understanding even now. And in this we have a very well-known expression called Shoho Jisso. Shoho Jisso. Shoho is each and everything, and Jisso is the true reality. So in another word, this is the more detailed explanation of form and emptiness, how this interrelate, and how this is explained as two elements of one reality. This portion I don't want to get into too much at this point, so I just like to tell you Number one, Okumura Roshi has a wonderful explanation about this Shoho Jisso teaching in his commentary of Sutra of Mountain and Water, Mountain and Water, I think, Sansuikyo. This is the part of Shobogenzo. And then this book was composed based on transcription of Genzoe on this fascicle Okumura Roshi gave. And so you can actually read about that and really can understand what this Lotus Sutra's way of describing this very well. And also, concurrently, we are offering Kannongyo lecture series. And you can either follow us either on YouTube or website, or you can also participate our lecture series in person. But anyway, in this Kannongyo, chapter 25 of Lotus Sutra, I will touch their expression, Lotus Sutra-esque expression of what it isness, Buppo and Butsudo. So, I always mention probably most important three major Mahayana texts are Prajnaparamita Sutras and Lotus Sutra and this Avatamsaka Sutra. So Avatamsaka Sutra, chronologically speaking, comes after Lotus Sutra. We do know by now that the origin of Avatamsaka Sutra is fragments of smaller texts which existed much earlier than 4th century in India. Then eventually it is really brought over to this desert nation called the Kingdom of Khotan. And then around 4th century, but definitely by the beginning of 5th century, all of this was collected and assembled and re-edited into this large structured sutra called Avatamsaka Sutra. So in this Avatamsaka Sutra, they also have a very, very interesting and also strikingly clear description of Butsudo and Buppo. And in any case, you might have probably heard about this word, intrasnet. Intrasnet is not a depiction from sutra itself, but once Avatamsaka Sutra inspired a group of people to start to create Avatamsaka school. This school really created the entire structure of the teaching of Buddha, and then in it they started to incorporate this almost pictorial image of what it isness, and that's normally called intrasnet, which I'm going to go into that in the next two lectures after this. So please wait. But right now I'm basically talking about, so ever since the beginning of Buddhism, beginning of Buddha's teaching, Buddha always tried to depict, some people don't like this English word, but the true reality of this universe, or how this universe is truly made of. And then by discovering that and clarifying that, we as a human being somehow understands, somehow almost naturally starts to behave in the manner Buddha actually taught us. So that's Butsudo. So all of this is basically depicting Buppo and Butsudo. And then I was actually trying to chronologically explain what kind of expression still remains. And then by doing so, you really start to see why we always call those three sutras as the most important, influential three Mahayana texts. So that's what's written, Buppo and Butsudo. Now, before getting into how Avatamsaka Sutra describes Bukpo and Butsudo, I like to talk a little bit about the name of this Avatamsaka Sutra. Now, this portion is really complicated, so I like to do it a little slowly for myself. And also, from the beginning, I have to tell you, for instance, this book translates has on the cover says Avatamsaka Sutra, yes? And then currently, we call this as a Flower Adornment Sutra. And also, Flower Adornment Sutra is also a translation of Kengon Sutra. And what we call this sutra is Kengon-kyo. But by now, we all know we actually don't know how to translate the original title of this book text. And all of those names are basically so-called nickname among the created among the consensus among people for centuries. And then currently, honestly speaking, scientifically or empirically, maybe in English, we really cannot explain fully what was the intention of the original title of the sutra. So we're still using those so-called nicknames of the sutra, Kengon-kyo Avatamsaka Sutra or Flower Adornment Sutra. Now, the reason why we are so keen on discovering the intention of this name of the sutra is that the name of the sutra actually indicates the contents of the sutra, or how we should maybe read the contents of the sutra. So I like to explain one by one. So I incorporated the most current discovery for this portion. And maybe, I haven't read this, but this book also has some sort of academic explanation of the background of the sutra, etc., etc. May have included some information I'm going to talk about. But my information comes from, there is a, this is a person who has already passed on, but Soto school priest and one of the very well-known academic priest, Takasaki Jikido. He was the editor of many important Buddhist texts. As a Soto school priest, we continue to study, such as Shoyoroku. It's a collection of koans. As you probably already know, Hekiganroku Brief Record is nothing to do with our Soto school priest. That's Rinzai school's textbook. For us, when we read koan study, we utilize as Shoyoroku. Shoyoroku is translated as a book of serenity, I think. Yes. I believe there's only one or two English translation, and then as long as you read those English translation, you may not be able to get the meat of the teaching very well. But in Japan, we usually utilizes the original text, which has a little bit of notation and footnotes added and edited by this wonderful teacher, Takasaki Jikido. And Takasaki Jikido was always also the editor of 10 to 12 volumes of academic book, which kept on coming as a whole collection every 15 to 20 years in the last several decades, as the collection of the new discoveries from Buddhist academics. So, as you know, Buddhist Academy only established about 150 years ago, but we have done so much about discovery of many things. So we are quite now knowledgeable about how this Buddhism really evolved and developed, and how also dispersed and created many arbitrary streams and etc. etc. But of course, it is ongoing study. So there's always new surprising discovery comes from time to time. So therefore, this teacher Takasaki Jikido keep revising this collection of the book, and then I got hold of the most current one, entire volumes, and I also double checked the portion of current discovery of Avatamsaka Sutra. So my information may be not included in this, or maybe, I don't know, but this is the following is the things I like to deliver to you, and then also like to think about all of this together with you. So I'm going to use the shared screen now. So instead of using erase board, which is really hard to show in the video, I'm going to use the shared screen instead of using writing on the board. I wrote it down on the text. So this is the names of this sutra. So usually known as Kengon-kyo. By the way, as I probably mentioned it in the last lecture, this current English translation, which we are using as a textbook, comes from Kengon-kyo translation, not from anything from original Sanskrit. Because currently it is very difficult to find the original Sanskrit at this point. And then, so therefore, it is also known as Avatamsaka Sutra. Avatamsaka Sutra is a direct translation of Kegon. So it also means decorated by flowers. So that's why, as an English translation, this textbook says the Flower Adornment Sutra. But the full name of this Chinese translation is Dai Ho Ko Butsu Kegon Kyo. Dai Ho Ko Butsu Kegon Kyo. In our textbook, it has a name translated as a Great Expansive Buddha's Flower Adornment Sutra. But all of them doesn't really sit well with us, particularly as we actually read the sutra and studied the sutra. And then the following explanation really starts to make us feel, oh yeah, maybe, of course, you know. And then original Sanskrit name, actually there's two different stories delivered. Because Tibetan folks received the original Sanskrit version, and then the version they received title is very different from the version Chinese received. So I like to start from the Chinese tradition first. And according to the Chinese tradition, which means according to the record we have done by translators, which is left with Avatamsaka Sutra, Kengon Shu, theological notes, says the original Sanskrit title was Maha Vaipuriya Buddha Ganda Vyuha Sutra. That was the original title, the Chinese scholars say. Now, Maha is okay. Maha is large, great, but of course, in Buddhist sense, Maha and great, meaning great and large, it doesn't mean vis-a-vis not great or not small, you know. It is beyond the measurement. So therefore, it's great as beyond the measurement. It's beyond this dichotomy. In that way, it's great and large. So, and then next portion, Bipriya is also describes it is a spatial immeasurably largeness. So therefore, in Chinese translation, it translated as a Dai Ho Ko. So Dai, in this case, is a Sino-Japanese translation of Maha, beyond dichotomy. And then Ko Ho is also very interesting. Ho Ko is very interesting in this case. This Ho is direction, but it's also describes in Buddhist terminology unlimited direction. So remember, for instance, Jokei-san, our Dharma cousin, our dear Dharma friend, who supports us from France, her temple's name is, in original Japanese temple's name, it's Hokaiji. Hokaiji's Ho is unlimited direction, and Kai is open. So opening to unlimited direction, unlimited space, and that's where temple is. So therefore, the temple name is basically unlimited abode, is the French word of unlimited abode. So in another word, Joge-san's temple is the same name as the first portion of Kengon-kyo. Now that's actually okay. It's quite clear. But then there's lots of record left by Chinese translators, and also the most important one of the founders of Chinese Kengon school. His name is Fa Zhang. We pronounce his name as Hozo. So please excuse me, as my Chinese pronunciation is really bad and I can't really communicate with the Chinese people. So instead, I'm usually using Chinese characters to communicate with the Chinese people and utilizing Japanese pronunciation. This way, Chinese students can actually understand me. So anyway, so when I say Hozo, that's Fa Zhang. This is Hozo. And Hozo was somebody who lived from 644 to 712, and who established basically Kengon theology. I'm hoping that everyone understands what this Kengon theology means, which means just like a Tendai school created the entire structure of teaching separately from Lotus Sutra, they really created a written structure of teachings. And then in the same manner, Kengon school also did the same thing. So we call this as a Kengon theology. But Kengon theology is, of course, huge enough to include entire Buddha's teaching up to that point, of course. And then their record actually shows original translator really had lots of debates because they really didn't quite understand the intention of this word, Ganda Vyuha. Ganda Vyuha. Now, Ganda Vyuha can be translated several different ways. So what they did at that point, this is, Hozo's point. So in other words, it is the point when Avatamsaka Sutra came to China, and then the Chinese started to create several different versions of translation, particularly, most importantly, 60 versions of Kengon-kyo. And then they decided, well, as a consensus, Ganda, meaning various flowers. So various flowers is translated as Zakka. And then Vyuha is ornament. So therefore, they translated this word into Gonshoku. So Ganda Vyuha, Zakka Gonshoku, and then as a compound ornamentation with various flowers, Zakka Gonshoku, it becomes I think many of you do understand Chinese characters and kanji, so you can see this portion, combined, it becomes kegon. So kegon is an abbreviation of zakka gon shoku, which means various flower ornaments, or ornaments made by various flowers, or ornaments by of various flowers, shall we say. But at the same time, there was another theory. The another theory was, oh, by the way, I just have to mention this Ganda Vyuha a little more. Ganda, at that time, most commonly used meaning of Ganda is the type of boil, or the type of the skin problem that shows up on cheek, or face, or neck. But people thought, well, this is kind of strange because, several hundred years later, probably meaning probably changed. But even though it's commonly used as a skin problem at this point, probably they meant something else several hundred years ago. So in other words, it was instead of lump or bump or swelling and skin boil. But if you use those meaning, it doesn't make any sense as a sutra. So therefore, Ganda's another meaning is stem of the flower. Or, for instance, you have probably seen bamboo trees, right? Bamboo trees has those section or joint, a node, so to speak. So this ganda also meant not only stem, but this portion of a joint, a node, or section. But then, stem or node or section, as it is, does not become flower. So that's what really troubled translators. But at the same time, when you take a look at the last portion of Kengonkyo, you remember this, the third one. In this text, it's supposed to be chapter 39, because this is an 80 version of Kengonkyo. This is that Sudana visiting 53 bodhisattvas, remember? And then in that, we actually translated as a chapter's name as entering Dharma realm, New Hokkaibon. But originally I mentioned this was a separate sutra, yes? And we can actually prove that this was a pre-existing separate sutra which got incorporated into Kengonkyo later on. But then when this was a separate sutra, this was called Ganda Vyuha. So considering what's happening in this Ganda Vyuha, what is happening is main character Sumeda, sorry, I keep pronouncing his name differently, Sumeda, goes visit each and every places. So in another word, there's a 53 joint, or 53 segment. So was 53 nodes, and then entirely each portion actually becomes a scene by scene by scene, and then connecting these scene becomes one sutra. So maybe they meant this way, and that's why they use the word node or section and joint, ganda. And then also vyuha also has another meaning, which means manifestation or appearances. So therefore, Ganda Vyuha can be translated shosetsu ni okeru jigen. In another word, manifestation in each section, if we translate directly. So therefore, it's referring those section by section or scene by scene when Sudana and Bodhisattva meets. So that may be actual name. And that may be the actually intention of the sutra. And also, if you place this onto the entire sutra, it kind of makes sense, because I will be explaining this in detail in later on, but also this is the whole sutra is almost made into like a grand opera style, and each section is a scene by scene, and also this scene keeps changing. So therefore, it is almost like a section by section, and each section manifests Buddha Dharma. So that may be the name. So if at the point of Chinese translation, if they decided to go to that direction, we might have actually received this sutra in a completely different name. And there was no association with flower, despite the fact this word kegon sounds so beautiful in Sino-Japanese, particularly in Japanese word. When we hear this word kegon, we almost automatically, immediately kind of picturizes incredible amounts of flower petals. At least I do. But then it may be complete delusion, depending on that. But I think this is very interesting. Also, most recently, another theory is presented. This theory is also very interesting. The theory is Ganda, when used as a part of a compound of this word, can mean the most. So something upmost. So like a great being greatest, the most beautiful instead of beautiful. So it is the most, and the vyuha also can be translated as a separation, separated from, staying far away. So in other words, Ganda vyuha can translate as the farthest away from where? Samsara. So that may be, in another word, this is the upmost manifestation of Buddha land, or upmost manifestation, farthest away from samsara, upmost highest manifestation of Buddha, or Buddha Dharma. I think in any cases, all of them actually starts to make sense, rather than just say Flower Adornment Sutra. I think this is quite interesting. Now, looking back to, let's see, Tibetan origin. Tibetans have the record to say when they received the original Sanskrit version, from which they translated into Tibetan, they say they received it as a Buddha Avatamsaka Sutra. So here, they actually have the word Avatamsaka. Yeah. Buddha Avatamsaka. It's not the Buddha's Avatamsaka. It's Buddha Avatamsaka. It's a compound, new created word. So that also gave the Tibetan translators a little bit of a headache. So I explain a little more. Now, Avatamsaka itself originally means personal ornamentation, particularly accessory for the ears, made for flowers. So, for instance, when you think accessory made out of flowers for ears, you may kind of imagine some kind of dangling earring or pierced earring with a flower or ornamentation. But I think it is more closer to Hawaiian tradition of, using plumeria flower on the, earlobe. And then it also shows who's single, who's married, who's taken, who's available, eligible, etc., etc. But it's also a beautiful ornamentation of, particularly for women's hairdo. Yeah. So originally it meant that. But the interesting portion is it is not utilized as just Avatamsaka. So if you place the word Buddha Avatamsaka separately, Yeah, you could say it's ornamentation for Buddha or ornamentation by Buddha. But troublesome point is there is a pre-existing word called Buddha Avatamsaka in pre-existing text, particularly in Setsu Issai Ubu, Sarvastivadian has this Buddhist literature called Divya Avadana. I personally don't know much about Divya Abadana, and I tried to look for Japanese translation, but I couldn't find it. So I just have to deliver this to you from what I read from this academic, research report paper. But according to this Buddhist literature, do you understand the concept of Buddhist literature? Which means ever since those old days. Oh, first of all, I have to tell you about what Sarvastivadya means. I think within this group, I often talk about this, so people who are participating in our lecture series probably already know, but just in case you don't. After Gautama Buddha died, according to what Gautama Buddha wished, many people went back to their original countries and they started to teach. And hundreds of years later, all of those groups of the people started to form and dispatch and form, dispatch. But for some reason or another, after 200 to 300 years, there were about 2 dozens of groups remained in southern India, and 2 dozens of another 2 dozen, just about 2 dozens remained in northern India. So in this time, we call this as a many Buddha-Bukkyo, translated as a many school Buddhism era. And then in this era, Buddha's teaching is finally started to be inscribed into letters and words. So this is a tremendously changing, transformative year. I'm sorry, I'm going to click this so I can see the audiences. Tremendously transformative year from oral tradition becomes changing into written tradition. And of course, this brings so much, many pros and cons in, spiritual traditions. The reason why they didn't write down and why it started to happen, this is yet another, matter. So I really like to talk about this in ancient Buddhism class. So please come to the ancient Buddhism class when we talk about that. So I'm going to set it aside. And then during this period of Buddha-Bukkyo, many school Buddhism, Hinduism, currently we call this as a Hinduism, but it is almost like outside of Japan, non-Japanese people call what we do as a Shintoism. There's no Shintoism. There's no ism in Japan. That's what we indigenously do for ever since the beginning of the history. But to view and explain what the Japanese indigenous folks like myself originally does as some kind of thought system, I guess people have to give a name. So therefore they gave a name called Shintoism. In the same manner, what the indigenously Indian major population of Indians were, based on as a belief system. Basically, it's a bit like what we call Brahmism. Eventually started to form into a more structured belief system. And then eventually it will be called as a Hinduism. And then Hinduism really started to arise and started to push Buddhism away. And then by this time, Buddhism is really supported by wealthy, powerful people. And then also, despite of the type of the practice Gautama Buddha himself went through, now ordained Buddhist priests are now living under the patronage of these people. So therefore, it was very important to keep the patronage. And those patrons really like something more powerful something like godlike that has a power to protect those people. So therefore, some group, particularly in the northern India, started to incorporate some theology into their theology, which doesn't seem to be in sync with Gautama Buddha's teaching, but it became almost like tried to lean toward Hinduism as close as possible. So one of those groups was Sarvastivadian. And Sarvastivadian's teaching incorporated, instead of Shanyata teaching, which is basically constantly everything constantly changes, there's no one static thing existing as if just one solid thing. Instead of that, they start to incorporate, yes, everything is created by interrelatedness, but some elements are static and permanently existing. So therefore, this word Sarvastivadian, meaning talking about all of them actually does exist. So that name became the group's name. So it's called Sarvastivadian. Now, Sarvastivadian also created many of those stories. For instance, there's a difference between Buddhist literature vis-a-vis Buddhist sutra. So Jataka stories is not the sutra, but it's a created literature. Yes, but often we utilize it as a teaching because it does incorporate many interesting teachings, and you can actually read it almost as if it is a Buddhist teaching. But it's a literature. It is not a sutra. So therefore, Sarvastivadian actually did have the type of the literature like that. And then they focused on the depiction of Gautama Buddha actually had a supernatural power. So this is the era of creating all of those so-called kind of supernatural stories that gets kind of accumulated almost as if, when you don't really bathe very well, when you don't really clean yourself very well, all these little things start to stuck in your skin and stuck into your ear, etc., etc. I guess world religion is like that. Not only Buddhism, but everything. If you really have to go through this, examination, exploration, clarifying, etc., etc., constantly, unfortunately, all these little, superstitions, local habits, etc., etc., gets in and sticks to it. So this was one of those. I'm sorry, I have to say that. I think. And then in this literature, this word, Buddha Avatamsaka, means in this literature, at one point, Gautama Buddha was challenged by another, non-Buddhist teacher. And in this, it's almost like I'm sorry, I'm starting to imagine. I grew up in Japan in 50s and 60s, so I'm a children of Godzilla movies. So I always imagine, Godzilla versus Mothra, Godzilla versus King Ghidorah. So in another word, for American kids, it's almost like Superman versus Batman kind of thing. So there are movies like that, and then one person, non-Buddhist person, does look at me, and then he does some kind of very interesting thing, and then to that, Gautama Buddha says, for me it's nothing, look at me, and he does this supernatural power and creates immense, great numbers of flowers and fills the whole world with the flower. And that was called Buddha Avatamsaka. So therefore, it describes Buddha's supernatural transformation in some specific occasions in this, supernatural being superhero battle. So therefore, Tibetan folks knew this, and then didn't know what to do, what to regard this, but somehow utilizes this image of the flower. So then made it into flower ornamentation. So, if we are talking about this sutra as a flower adornment or flower ornamentation or kegon, so to speak, we may actually be talking about just completely different thing. But one thing very clear to me about this, whatever the ornamentation is, in this case in the flower, what is the flower, what is the Buddha? Are we talking about the flowers? We are bringing some kind of flowers to ornament and adorn or adore Buddha. Or, just like Dogen actually sees this, are we, each one of us, each one of the things in this world, is a created ornamentation by the Buddha? So I think what the translators who decided to make it into flower adornment really meant, reading through this sutra, it's quite starting to be clear. We are not separating Buddha out there. We are depicting this world and we are all included in it. And we are really receiving this explanation. Each one of us are born out of Buddha, goes back into the Buddha, and each one of us have a potential to become a beautiful ornamentation, beautiful manifestation of this Buddha world, of this Buddha Dharma, of this Dharmakaya. Each one of us will become children of Vairochana Buddha. So that's probably why in Nara, in Daibutsu, Vairochana Buddha sits on the flower, lotus flower, but behind there's a numerous numbers of little Buddha. That what they are talking about, that's us. Or at least can we aspire to be that? So I think from the message I get from a sutra itself, that's the right way to read this title. Despite of all these debates and arguments and trouble making decision to how to translate, I think all of those translation, flower ornamentation or manifestation by section, etc., actually points out one thing, that we are not separating things vis-a-vis me versus Dharmakaya, me versus Buddha, me versus what it isness. It is together. In me, everything in Buddha Dharmakaya is here. Everything in Dharmakaya does create me. And this wonderful, typical, Kengon-kyo trajectory of one is all is one, is already described in this title, or in this difficult process of choosing the title. But in the end, all of the chosen titles are pointing at that particular point. So I thought this was very interesting, going through this academic portion. Very briefly, I like to spend the next 10 minutes explaining the different Kengon-kyo is delivered to us. In other words, we received different versions of Kengon-kyo. I keep talking about this, but first of all, Kengon-kyo, the origin is separate sutras. Most possibly still existed somewhere around AD 1st century to 2, 3 century, 3rd centuries in India. And somehow it really was also collected in Kingdom of Khotan. By the way, do you know where the Kingdom of Khotan is? Let me show you this. Hold on. This is the type of the area I kind of dream someday I like to travel. But at this right moment, because of some, political reason, all of those places I like to travel is a very difficult places to go. This is the current Ugai. It's which one is good? You know the basic idea of the map of China, yes? So this is east and this is west, and this is Tibetan Himalayan mountains, and this is north toward current Russia. So in between very populous area of China, a large portion of the western China is a desert. And then in this desert, sorry, I want to put the map back onto the shared screen. This desert is called Taklamakan Desert. Taklamakan, the meaning is basically once you enter, you will die. You cannot come out alive. So it's a desert of death. I think the word is killing. So desert that kills. So the implication is it's a huge desert and there's no way once you enter, no chance to come back alive. But then interesting portion is this desert has northern route and southern route, and that's around the area where they used to have a river. And then thousands of years ago, this was a very fluid body of water, which dried up and became such huge desert. But in those days, there's oases, and those oases created the nations. So this is where Buddhism started to spread and traveled through northern India, Silk Road into this area. And so this is the kingdom of Khotan created here. Currently, it is called Shinkyo Uyghur Jijiku in Japanese. In American English, we call this Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, which is the area Chinese always wanted to occupy because it's a very fluid area for Silk Road trade. But currently, they took over again and then basically created a sub-territory, so to speak. Like Americans have Puerto Rico and Samoa, etc. They have this territories of China. And then this is the area currently people are really controversial area, noticing some sort of religious human rights issues and etc. Child labor, etc., etc. But interestingly, once this was much more flourishing area than Central Chinese nations. So China always wanted to take over this place, sometimes beaten away, and sometimes beat them and then take over. It's just like a swing, always, century after century. But anyway, this is Khotan. I'm going to talk about the Khotan later, but then let's put this back into the note shared screen. Notes on the shared screen. So all of this was brought over to then one of the center of Buddhist academia, Kingdom of Khotan. And then in this Kingdom of Khotan, there was a group of people who really started to feel like re-experiencing or what would be the English word to describe this? Well, it's a 追体験 in Japanese. Some people really wanted to try what exactly Gautama Buddha went through. So there was a group of the people, most possibly created some kind of Buddhist organization, so to speak, into that kind of practice. I find it very interesting because, currently there's a lot of scientific experience going on utilizing some kind of psychiatric or psychedelic medication and tried to get into altered view of the world and etc. etc. And we even have someone who's kind of devoted to our group and comes to our lecture series, and wonderful sitter came to Buddhism through that kind of experiences. So I'm not really negating those things at all. And also, it's also quite interesting that, Kyoso Hanjaku system in China. Kyoso Hanjaku system is the Chinese system they created when they received a whole bunch of Indian texts, and they got so confused what is what. At that time, they really didn't have much knowledge or way to discover what was written when. So therefore, they received Paricanon to Prajnaparamita Sutra, to all of those Mahayana Sutra. At the same time, everything was basically dumped on the translators. So translators translated everything, and they decided maybe Gautama Buddha was awakened, and for the first 7 days, he didn't have to speak to anybody. So therefore, he could just free formatted way describe things what he was, experiencing. And that is, they thought, is Avatamsaka Sutra. So in another word, when you read Avatamsaka Sutra, you feel, wow, this is so psychedelic. It's quite interesting. So a group of the people probably took up that portion, feeling, wow, these sutras actually describe pretty much free formatedly, free consciously describing the world of internal, psychological world of Buddha. And they really want to re-experience it. And then they started to feel, well, maybe we should put this together, and made it into that free formatted expression, Gautama Buddha's enlightened world. And that was the origin. And then this was most possibly created by year 420. I'm sorry, this note is mixed with Japanese and English, but 420. And then this had 34 chapters. And this was translated by Buddhabhadra. Buddhabhadra was someone, Sanskrit, teacher, 353 to 429, and then produced a Chinese translation in the China, which was still divided by several countries, but Dongjin, Toxin dynasty invited him and then translated 60 kegon. So this one is called 60 kegon, 60 kegon. This is the version that came to all of those Asian countries and created a huge impact. So even now, when I go to Todaiji and Kangakuin take lectures, we are actually receiving a lecture based on this 60 kegon. So in another word, please remember I was talking about 8,000 verses of Prajnaparamita Sutra vis-a-vis 25,000 verses. It's almost like same similarity. This is succinct, down to the point. It's much easy to read and readable and understandable. Then of course people start to think, I want more explanation. So therefore in Khotan, they probably produced more and more text and combined it. And then this one was brought over to Tang Dynasty and then translated by Shikushananda. Shikushananda is someone who was born in 652 and died in 710. And this is the era of a famous Tang Dynasty, almost villainous kind of a woman empress. Busokten is the word we usually call. I think Chinese pronunciation is something like Zetian Wu Hao. Chinese student must be laughing at me with my bad pronunciation. But then I'm sure they know what I'm talking about. In year 692, Tang Dynasty China, after 22 years of giving it up, they finally invaded back into Kingdom of Hotan area and took it back and occupied it. So it's a bit like a current situation. In current China went in and took over the area. And then brought, at that time, it was the time of 80 Kegon. There's a couple of several centuries later, probably Kegon-kyo got longer and longer and longer and more detailed. So this version was translated in China. And then this had 39 chapters. And then this was composed and translated almost immediately in late 7th century. Now that's the textbook we have. That's the English translation of the textbook we have. So at one point I have to show you the structural difference and how it is structured, similarity and difference between 60 and 80, most possibly in the latter segment of this lecture. And then besides that, I mentioned there's a 40 version, 40 Kengon, 40 Kengon. This was most possibly created by late 8th century, and this has 40 chapters. And then this was translated in Tang Dynasty by someone whose name is Prajunya. Interesting name. Wisdom. Who was someone who lived somewhere between 8th and 9th century. Exactly, we really don't know. And then this 40 Kengon version is basically extensive version of chapter 39. So this is entering Dharma realm. That specific chapter is really expanded into 40 chapters. And then I keep mentioning about this Tibetan translation version. This was probably circa 9th century. As you know, Tibetan took the Buddhism in 8th century. So and also because of the location being so close to Silk Road nation of India, it's kind of interesting that they took up the most latest at that time, so probably most a la mode version of Kengon-kyo into Tibet, and this is 45 chapters, and then translated to Jinamitra. Now there are actually more numbers of versions of Kengon-kyo originally, but currently most important, most impact-making, I would say, 60 and 80. Because it is maintained and held by both Japanese and Americans and Western Europeans now. And then these are the group of the people who are still actively studying Kengon-kyo and manifesting the teaching from the Kengon-kyo. And then our task is to keep reading this 80 version and also keep taking the meat of it with the support of the 60 version, which is most succinct and easy to really go through all these repetitive expression, and then go right into the core of the teaching. So that's something I like to do later on. So today, time is up. So I'm going to close this lecture number 2 at this point. So what I like to do next is lecture 3. I like to go into the overview of how characteristically Kengon-kyo teaches Buddha Dharma and the Buddha way. And then what is their typical expression? And then by listening to that, I think you may be able to start reading this sutra on your own with that as a guideline. As soon as you start to, understand each text has some sort of a inclination, so shall we say, or habits in explanation and expression. And as long as you understand that, it's kind of easy, much easier to go through this journey by yourself. So something like that I like to try. Then after that, we are finally going to start to read the text from chapter 1. And that's the syllabus I'm trying to go through. Okay, so today I'm closing this section by saying that. And thank you very much. And then I see you next time.